OK. J'ouvre maintenant la séance.
The meeting is called to order. Welcome to meeting number 67 of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts.
First of all, I want to thank Ms. Yip for filling in for me yesterday on the subcommittee with respect to the committee business. I do appreciate that. I had a conflict, and I appreciate you being there. So we have several motions before us, at least three by my count, as well as we have committee reports to get through. I'm going to recognize Garnet Jennings, please.
Thank you, Chair. We experienced a number of efforts to delay or block motions, and I'm hoping that at the last meeting,
Chair?
and I'm hoping that today will be the day we get something done. So
Just one
I
second.
would like
point
to
of order, Mr.
move.
Jennings.
We've had our hands up. It was very clear that we wanted to speak. I don't want to raise a point of privilege here, but we've been here. You've seen our hands. For some reason, you haven't recognized us.
Oh, I will certainly get to you, Mr. Fragoscatti.
We had our hands up first.
Just let me hear this one first, and I'll come back to you, Mr. Jennings, on the point of order. So, but I'll hear it. Go ahead.
We've had our hands up first. We would like to speak. It is our privilege to do so, and it is well understood that the side or the member that has their hand up first can be recognized first, should be recognized first.
I'll hear the point of order on this side. Mr. Jennings, please.
Yeah, so it seems that Mr. Fragos-Gatos may have been sitting in here for the half hour before the meeting started with his hand in the air. There is no precedent for the claim that a member can raise their hand to speak prior to the meeting beginning. I had my hand raised when the meeting was beginning, and I called the attention of the chair. It's up to the chair to identify who caught his eye first, but the idea that some precedent is established by raising your hand prior to the beginning of a meeting is absurd and has no basis in the rules. There is no doctrine of privilege that one member who wants to be recognized ahead of another member who has caught the chair's eye first has that right. But I think the member might, wait his turn.
So I will. That is my view. I'm going to check with the clerk here. But I have members that approach me all the time about committee business and raising issues, and my view is it's the when the gavel is dropped, the first person who catches my eye. I do see that all the government members do want to speak to this. But I'm going to double check this to make sure I'm on solid ground, because if it is challenged, I at least want to be in the corner with the clerk. Just one sec, please. Thank you. I'm going to maintain my ruling here and return the floor to Mr. Jess. Yes, Mr. Fragos-Gatos.
It's not my intent to continue to raise points of order. However, we did speak before. You saw us as you came in, and you committed to us that we would have the opportunity to speak. And it's clear you saw our hands. You knew that our hands were in the air. You knew that we wanted to speak. This is a point of privilege here now. This is something that I have not seen before at committee. When we have members that have expressed an intent to speak, made that clear to the chair in advance of the meeting. Granted, it was not a day ago, but it was at the beginning of today's meeting. When you walked in, you saw our hands. You committed to us verbally that we would have the opportunity to speak first. And now, suddenly, you have turned around. It's not something I would have expected more. I'm quite surprised at the approach that's been taken. I think this taints, without question, the way this committee will operate from here on out. Mr. Chair, you've been fair as a chair of this committee. You say that Mr. Jennings caught your eye first. You looked at us with our hands in the air. Clearly, we caught your eye first. But you made the decision, and I emphasize that, the decision to look towards Mr. Jennings when it was very clear we had your attention. So I can't but help emphasize this point. I will continue to argue it until our side is given the opportunity to live up to our roles here as members of Parliament in keeping with established precedent that I've seen at committees and that we all have lived by. When members have their hand up, they are recognized. And we did catch your attention. We did catch your eye, if you want to use your words exactly, because you looked to us and told us we would have the opportunity to speak first. Then you changed your decision. It's not fair. It's not in keeping, again, with the role of a chair who's supposed to be a neutral arbiter of procedural rules relating to committee. And I respectfully ask that I be allowed to raise the point that I wanted to raise, followed by Ms. Yip, followed by Ms. Bradford, followed by Mr. Sidhu, followed by Ms. Shanahan, who came here in advance, had their hand up, were ready to speak, wanted to speak. You committed to us that we would have the opportunity to speak.
Point of order, Chair.
And now there's been a different course taken.
And you will have the opportunity to speak, of course. Now, I take exception that you seem to think me talking to you before the committee, I committed that you would speak first. I did not say that. We were having an informal discussion. I asked you if you wanted to share with me what the business at hand was. You chose not to do that, which is your right. But you've made a statement that I challenged, that I committed that you would speak first. I did not do that. I had another opposition member speak to me in the House of Commons, also looking to speak first. I do not commit to anyone about speaking first in this committee. And you can come here 10 minutes before or 10 hours before and put your hand up. Until the gavel goes down, I see nobody. I see nobody until this meeting begins. Now, you can take exception about who I saw first, but I'm recognizing Mr. Genuous because he caught my eye first. So I have. All right. So I'll stop there because I see there's a few other people that want to speak to this point. I'm not sure if it was Mr. Genuous, Mr. McCauley first. Mr. Genuous.
To just proceed because I think we're seeing delay tactics from the government again, who doesn't want to allow us to get to the bottom of what happened to the Trudeau Foundation.
So I think.
So I can.
Well,
I
let me just.
have a lot
yeah.
to say on this matter, but I'd be happy to just move on because.
Okay. You have the floor, Mr. Genuous.
Thank you. I'd like to move that the committee resume consideration of the motion.
I have another point of order. Yes, Mr. Sidhu.
We're going to have a lot of points of order.
To my colleague across the way, it's not a tactic to delay. It's about a level of respect amongst colleagues, I believe, is what the issue here is.
There's not a point of what is your point of order?
My point of order is I don't think the chair recognized what. So when we're online and we put our hands up, there's a precedent set that who speaks first, I think, on the Zoom system. So whether I'm in the room or whether I'm online, your hands up. No.
The rules have existed for hundreds
Right.
of
But when
years
you put your
before
hand
the
up on
existence of
Through
Zoom.
you, Mr. Chair, when you put your hand up on Zoom, there's an order that's set of speaking. No, but it sets an
committee
order of
rules
speaking.
predate Zoom by hundreds of years.
You can speak. Perhaps I will put our acting clerk on the hot seat, and I'm sorry to this. Could you perhaps explain the procedures as you just explained them to me? So now the members won't just be challenging me; they'll be challenging the committee and its as an institution.
Donc, effectivement, c'est à la présidence.
It's up to the chair to recognize people speaking first.
Lord.
I move that the committee resume consideration of the motion that I moved at the last meeting.
Which is this is the notice of motion that in relation to its study on the Trudeau Foundation, the committee authorized the chair to summon witnesses on its behalf.
Yes.
All right. Do you have anything else to say about that?
It's dilatory. I can't say anything else, even if I
Oh, so there is a vote to resume. All right, very good. Just 1 second. Clerk, could you call the roll call, please?
Mr. Genius,
In favor.
Mr. Cram,
In favor.
Mr. McCauley,
In favor.
Madame Sinclair Desgagnés,
Oui.
Mr. Desjardins.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I missed what motion this is.
Thank you. Mr. Disley, this is a motion that will allow us to return to discussing, debating, and hopefully ultimately voting on the Trudeau Foundation witnesses who have so far either declined or been silent to see how we proceed as a committee. So this vote is not on the motion itself. It is to return to the discussion.
Yes.
Thank you. Could you repeat that, Mr. Desjardins? He did say yes, but please repeat that, sir.
Oh, sorry. I vote yes. Can you hear that? Is there a problem with my mic, Mr. Chair? or-
Yes, thank you. I heard it.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Ms. Bradford. Mr. Fragiscatos.
No.
Ms. Shanahan.
No.
Mr. Sidou.
No.
Ms. Yip.
No.
Yeas pour 5, nays contre 5.
And my vote is we resolve this matter, so I vote yes. Is that to be recognized, Ms. Shanahan? Why not? Okay, you have the floor.
Can you clarify now, Chair, what are we discussing at this point? Because I know I have many things that I want to discuss.
So, the motion, and Mr. Jennings, correct me in case there's been a change that I'm not aware of, but I believe the motion is that in relation to its study of the Trudeau Foundation, the committee authorized the chair to summon witnesses on its behalf. And now and we are discussing this because we have a meeting scheduled for Monday, June the 5th. And Mr. Edward Johnson, the Right Honorable David Johnson, and Mr. Mel Cap have either not responded or declined the committee's invitation. And in the last meeting, there was some discussion about how to proceed. I thought Mr. Genuis tried to bridge the gap between an immediate summons versus a firm request they appear, and that's where we are. And I'm happy to, if I've misstated that, Mr. Genuis, I will come back to you after Ms. Shanahan, but that's where we're at, Ms. Shanahan.
Well, indeed, Chair, you are reminding me of some of the discussion then that we had around this this motion, and that had to do with it that it is going too far, too fast, when there were intermediate steps that could be taken. And indeed, I think it behooves us as a committee, especially as the Public Accounts Committee, which is already going into ground that is not normally that of the Public Accounts Committee, that we treat potential witnesses with all due respect. And I think at that time, I had asked for the clerk to advise us as to, through you, Chair, to advise us as to what steps had been taken, what the responses were from the potential witnesses, and indeed, what I would prefer to see is that the chair, and I have been in this position before myself on other committees, that there is a discussion with the witnesses, individually, of course, regarding the modality of what would work, because to be summoning witnesses, and I have seen that now in on this same topic in other committees. It seems premature. Witnesses have been making themselves available, and there may be good and reasonable grounds why a witness, either for personal, for professional, or for matters of mandate, would not would decline to appear before this committee. And the first reason that I can think of is that they would not be dealing with the proper and normal authority that we deal with in this committee, which is through the Office of the Auditor General. And indeed, it would be her office that would most appropriately be in the position to meet with these individuals if indeed that was her choice to do so, if indeed that was an investigation that was appropriate to her office. And when I see members wondering why I'm putting so many qualifiers around my statements, it's because, of course, I don't think it is appropriate to this committee to be, in essence, investigating individuals who represent professionally or personally a charitable foundation, an organization who have been conducting their affairs as they do. But it's not this committee that, what would be next, Chair? Are we going to start investigating, I don't know, food banks of Canada? Are we going to be investigating Heart and Stroke Foundation? I mean, where are we going with this? This is over and above and outside of the purview of this committee. And so it is not surprising to me that the witnesses who I believe, but I can be corrected, have already appeared before other committees. They've already provided testimony that in a way, and I hope there are Canadians watching this, ordinary Canadians, those Canadians with the common sense that my colleagues so often vaunt, they say, well, why would it be that the Public Accounts Committee that has to do with audited public financial statements, that has to do with the performance reports, value for money reports on departments that provide services to Canadians, why would it be that that committee is calling individuals to testify before it when there are other committees and other agencies that are better fitted to do so? And so I have seen committees, ordinary people going about their own business. I have seen committees call people in just because of some tie that they had to some partisan point that wanted to be made by the opposition, and that those individuals were grilled, they were publicly humiliated, They were subjected to harassment, both online and physical harassment. They were people that were running a business. Speaker Spotlight is the group that I'm thinking of, that their employees were harassed in their offices, that the individuals themselves, the owners, why? Because they happened to book speakers that happened to be, in some cases, related to our Prime Minister. And of course, they booked many other speakers as well. But that point was lost in all of the publicity. And I think when ordinary Canadians saw that, they were horrified. And that's just one case that I remember vividly. Of course, there were other cases of people that being subjected to a witch hunt for partisan purposes, Chair. It had nothing to do with any kind of governance issue, nothing to do with any kind of proper execution of the work of the parliamentary committee at that time, where there was also an independent commissioner who was charged, if we're talking about ethics, we're talking about the conflict of interest and ethics commissioner, that work is done properly through that channel. And now we're dragging that kind of dirty politics into this committee, where we're going to be dragging people in front of this committee. We're not even giving them a chance to explain to us why they decline to appear before us. Chair, it is more than disappointing to see this committee being dragged to that level in what is essentially a partisan witch hunt. And I say that because if there were real concerns about the Trudeau Foundation and how it operated and how it conducted its affairs regarding the collection of donations, regarding how they accounted for those donations, regarding how they issued receipts, regarding anything else in the line of what this committee is occupied with, which is, of course,
Point of order, Chair.
good governance. And I would say,
So, Mr. Genius, a point of order, please. No.
Yes, it's a point of order. I'm concerned that there may be an error in the minutes of the April 24th meeting. Just reviewing the minutes, it's important we have accurate minutes, of course. I'm reviewing the minutes of the April 24th meeting, and it says that all members present, including the Liberal members, voted in favor of the motion to study.
Thank you,
the
Mr.
Trudeau
Genuis.
Foundation. I'm wondering if there's an error in the
Thank you, Mr.
minutes.
Genuis. I will turn to Ms. Shanahan.
thank you, Chair. That indeed, given that there is and are, and we indeed started that study, we said, let's meet with CRA officials. And we did, in camera. The CRA officials were here. They answered the questions that were posed to them to the best of their ability, because, of course, they are governed, and rightfully so, by legislation which prevents them from divulging confidential, private information. And this is legislation that was duly passed by Parliament for the protection of Canadians' tax information. And that these officials, in fact, are duty-bound or risk criminal charges if they divulge personal information here in this committee to anyone outside of the bounds of where they are able to work. But these officials were able to tell us that the moment that anyone raises a flag about any organization, about any taxpayer that may be engaged in improper activities, doesn't matter how small or of what kind or of what distinction, that they do investigate. But could they confirm that they were investigating the Trudeau Foundation? No, because that brings them into the area of divulging information that they are legally bound not to do so. Do we have any doubt? Is there anyone here that has any doubt that if the CRA has information that could lead to a proper investigation on their part and the recovery of, because it usually has to do with improperly reporting revenues or expenses or somehow benefiting from the tax system or somehow allowing others to benefit from the tax system? Chair, I think we've all had that experience, whether it's ourselves or a family friend. I worked in this area and I certainly saw it happen, that when an individual gets a letter from the audit department of the CRA, it's serious business, and they certainly take their work very seriously. And so that is where, if these individuals that this committee is looking to summon as witnesses, if they have good reason, and that I would like to learn more about, that they are already perhaps dealing with the CRA, we don't know. But I think that there is scope to think that if we are wanting to, again, I am open to learning about whether or not there is reason to be concerned, but I want the proper agencies, the proper authorities to do the job of doing the actual investigation. And so I am going to ask you now, Chair, if you can inform the committee of any developments in this regard. And I'd also like to hear from the Chair, from you yourself, about how you go about asking witnesses to come. Normally in public accounts, it's not an issue because normally the witnesses that we invite here know that they're going to be invited, and there's no issue about that. It's the Auditor General, it's her staff. Well, we've gone a little bit out of the box, and there's actually been support around that. But out of the box in pursuing follow-up to Auditor General studies, in questioning department officials. Department officials certainly know that they're going to be called to this committee, and they are certainly here. In fact, I can remember, this would be my NDP colleague's predecessor, David Christopherson, recalling that there was a time not that long ago that actually we couldn't get deputy ministers to this committee. And we insisted that indeed that had to be the case because it's the deputy minister. While it's the minister that's in charge of the policy part, it's the deputy minister that's in charge of the execution of the policy, programs, and so on. And that was where we were doing the digging in as far as the Public Accounts Committee that we wanted to know. And I've heard members here question deputy ministers repeatedly, and those questions were very on point as to what is the measurement system, what is the timeline, where's your action plan, why is it that you didn't meet that objective? How is it that this money got spent and we're not seeing the results? Those are the kinds of questions. That is the kind of material. That is the kind of output that is expected from this committee. And so, Chair, when you, with the clerk, are inviting witnesses, I don't think that it is difficult to obtain those witnesses. And that has allowed this committee to actually be an extremely productive committee. It has been a point of pride that we have been able to address, question witnesses, write reports. We have about 5 or 6 draft reports now on hand as I speak that I'm sure the chair would like to be able to table before we rise for the summer. I'm very hopeful that we'll get to those reports. But in the meantime, the odd time, no, I'll say on some very important occasions, when colleagues have raised a concern about the environmental commissioner reports, that we should be looking at those and amplifying those. That would have been from my colleague, Madame Sinclair de Gagné, or indeed that we have a minister come, because there has been repeated Auditor General reports on the same topic. We were in agreement with asking the minister to appear before us. We were certainly in agreement with asking the commissioner, and I know that in the past that was something that was not agreeable to the Conservative side, to have the environment minister here, the environment commissioner here, to further amplify his reports. And that is, well, I would like to have more discussion on that, perhaps at a later time, because it appears that now there seems to be some dissension as to whether our Conservative colleagues accept that there is climate change and accept that there needs to be something done about it. But I digress, Chair. And so I wonder if you can now tell us about what the status of discussions are with the witnesses.
I'll speak to these points. I just want to first of all clean up the list of speakers. Mr. Fradakaus, I'm sure you're one, but I just want to confirm Ms. Yip and Ms. Bradford as well. So this is on this point, or okay, we'll come back to that as well. I have Madame Sinclair de Gagné. So let me first of all, I'm going to take a step back just very briefly. So when we're doing what I'll call typical regular committee business, we do have exceptional witnesses come. It is by no means automatic. In fact, the superb team at this end, to my left and right, they have to send notices, follow up, and often remind officials that they have not only a request they appear, they have a statutory obligation to appear as accounting officers. And even then, it still requires some light cajoling and reminding of their obligation to appear as a matter of law. But it is by no means automatic. The clerk in particular is part greyhound, part diplomat, and always does a good job, and is informed wisely by the two analysts to ensure we have the proper and best witness possible. I'll now turn to the steps we took in this matter. First of all, I'll say, Ms. Shanahan, you are entitled to state and believe all the things you did as a duly elected member of this House and member of this committee, and your concerns about witnesses and why they've been asked to appear and reservations you might have. I will say, though, witnesses do not have that right when they are asked to come before a committee. If we extended it to witnesses, the system would break down. If we allowed witnesses to defy a request because they had a concern or an issue. So I'll turn now to some of the reasons that I received to inform members both. So the steps that were taken, I requested witnesses from all members. They came in. Those were sent out. I then proceeded to compile witnesses based on who had made requests. There was some overlap. There were some witnesses that were requested by 3 parties. There were some that were 1 or 2, and I worked with the clerk to balance it out and send that list out. There was no objection to it. The clerk then proceeded to invite those witnesses, and I won't name names, but I'll say the same thing I said the other day. One witness said he was unavailable because he was overseas. I proceeded to change the date because that was a witness that was requested by 3 parties. We changed the date, we sent the invitation out, and we were just told unavailable. And someone would appear on his behalf. Another witness has not replied, and the third has just said he has nothing to add. But that is not up to the witness to decide whether or not he or she has something to add. He's been invited to appear before the committee. So that is where we're at. Since then, there's been no further communications with them as I have sought direction from this committee. And so here we are with this motion looking for direction from 3 witnesses who have provided either very little or frankly no good reason as to why they should not appear before a House of Commons Standing Committee. On that, I will turn to Mr. Fragaskatos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think Ms. Shanahan, as she always does, puts into sharp focus the issues at stake in front of the committee. A summons is an extraordinary step, and if I've understood what Mr. Genis is exactly getting at, that in relation to its study of the Trudeau Foundation, the committee authorized the chair to summon witnesses on its behalf, is what the motion says. So this is not something that, in my experience, sitting on this committee for some time, others will have sat on it for longer, this is not something I've seen this committee consider before. I'm not sure how it's come to this point. I hope that this committee has not been politicized to a point of no return. I think that there is enormously beneficial work that we can do as committee members, as I've said many times in the past, and I've shown that in our actions, in the questions that we've asked of witnesses. It's a committee that where it's found the opportunity, and there's been many opportunities, it's worked. It's worked in a direction of nonpartisanship. It's worked in a direction that's underpinned by collegiality. But here we have in front of us, I think, a motion that even those who have presented it on the opposite side would admit, push comes to shove, is motivated by politics. This is the Audit Committee of Parliament, and we are now looking at a motion that is calling on summoning witnesses. Yes, it is true that under the rules of Parliament, committees and their chair in particular have the ability to do exactly that. But I don't think that we have to do that in this case. First of all, it would set an awful precedent, not just for this committee, but for other committees. I only remember one particular instance where it reached a point, I used the phrase earlier, Mr. Chair, of no return, and that was a few years ago where we had a long-standing public servant who was brought before Parliament, in my view, still unnecessarily, and it really poisoned the debate around what happens at committees. This is not something that we should see happen again. I think there's other ways to communicate the desire of the committee. I understand, Mr. Chair, that you've attempted to do that, but forgive me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you're the first chair who's asked witnesses to appear and have received a negative response. This is not out of practice. This does happen. We all sit on parliamentary committees. Some of us sit on multiple parliamentary committees. It's an extraordinary privilege to do so. But, Mr. Chair, I point to the fact that where it has happened, it's deeply unfortunate, and where, in terms of a summons is what I'm talking about, but where it does happen that there is a negative response, there's other avenues. There's other avenues to pursue rather than going to the extreme. It would be tantamount to an effort that would see someone who doesn't get their objective to begin with, doesn't reach their goal to start with, going to any extreme to achieve what they want. That's not in keeping with the collegial nature of what committees should strive to be. And I think that we also have to keep that in mind, Mr. Chair. Perhaps it's the time of year. This is my almost 8th year of serving in this House as a parliamentarian, and without fail, Mr. Chair, and I know you've served many years yourself, without fail, May, and today is June 1st, without fail, the months of May and June are the hardest months. It gets heated in here. We saw that, unfortunately, in question period today. The Speaker, who's I think we'll all agree, a good speaker, someone who's calm, raised his voice in a way that I haven't heard before, but it was not, it is quite relevant. It relates to the point, Mr. Chair. My colleague will have to allow me to finish the sentence, and then he can judge on relevance.
Mr. Fragasati, you have the floor.
Then you can judge on relevance
Mr. Genuis,
as I
Mr. Fragasati
finish the
has the floor.
sentence.
If
You
you'd
can
like the
both
floor,
judge.
would you like to be added to the list? All right, thank you.
I would just like you to call members to order who are not following the rules.
I'm following the rules.
Thank you,
I'm
Mr.
following the
Genuis.
rules.
I'm prepared to hear Mr. Fragaskatis out here.
If I've touched a nerve,
I will say
it's not
there's a
my
lot of that
intent.
today. Go ahead.
It's not my intent to touch a nerve. It's if I can, and now I have I'm being interrupted by my colleague, and I don't want to call him. I don't want to ask you, Mr. Chair, to call him to order. That's not what I'm about. And if I've touched a nerve, I apologize. In fact, I've worked for many years with the member opposite, and do enjoy the back and forth that we've often had. But leave that aside. I was pointing out to the fact that in question period today, things were especially heated, and I hope that we don't see the same thing happen at committees. And one thing that could take us down that path, Mr. Chair, is, with all due respect to him, motions like the one that have been put forward by Mr. Genuis. It is something quite extraordinary. And so there's the issue of this committee's mandate, which we have explored and I've spoken about, the work that we do here. There's the issue of the need to remain nonpartisan. But one thing that I have not put on the table, and that I'm putting on the table now, is the direction this committee could go if we were to pursue a motion like this. I think it would challenge the work ahead. And yes, we only have a few weeks here, I think. But I'm thinking about the fall. I'm thinking about the months to follow. Once a committee sets a precedent like this, it's kind of a poison chalice. It influences in the most negative fashion everything that follows. So I would ask my colleagues, not just Mr. Genuis, but all colleagues, what exactly is the motivation here? Is the motivation to score political points, as it were? Because if that's the motivation, you can do it in the House of Commons if you wish. At the Public Accounts Committee, we are obligated to look at issues in a serious way, as much as possible reach consensus. And on that point, let me simply speak in a very positive way about what Mr. Desjardins has brought to the table, because he's always looking to find compromise. He's always looking to as much as possible, reach that point in terms of the committee's opinion where we emerge and can put forward, if not a unanimous point of view, certainly one that is based on consensus. I've never understood consensus to mean unanimity. Either way, we have a motion here that is going to prove, and it is proven, extremely divisive. Extremely divisive. And I also ask us to consider what our constituents would want. Faced between a decision of looking at, for example, the situation in our prisons, which is something that this committee has explored in detail. Faced with the decision as to whether or not we would further examine the plight and position of Indigenous peoples on reserve in drinking water, the drinking water situation and boil water advisories. And yes, there's been enormous positive movement on that file, but there's still lingering challenges that exist, to put it mildly. We could look at all those things. Instead, we are now caught in a debate, one that our side is prepared to continue with because we think it's so important for all the points already mentioned. But we're caught in a debate that would prevent us from going forward, would prevent us from doing the serious work that this committee is tasked with. A summons is not something that is going to allow this committee to work in the direction that it always has, or almost always has. A summons is going to take us back. I wonder if there's thought given among members to any kind of compromise, some kind of compromise that would lessen the heavy-handed nature of the motion and what it ultimately seeks to put forward. I know that other members have something to say, and I don't want to take up their privilege to do so, Mr. Chair. I do have further thoughts, and I'm going to ask to be added to the speaking list once more. And I see your pen moving, and I hope that has you're writing my name. Perfect. That time he saw me.
I heard. No, I didn't. I heard
yes,
you.
A point to be revisited perhaps in the future. But I will leave it here for now, and I know Ms. Yip has been anxious to speak, so
Yes.
I'll turn it over.
So I have Ms. Yip, Ms. Bradford, Madame Saint-Clair Desgagnés. Very good. All right, Ms. Yip, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'm concerned about summoning witnesses. Witnesses are usually invited. They take the time to prepare their notes, put aside their busy schedules, and to come. It's not easy for witnesses to speak and answer any type of questions because they never know where we're coming from. So it does take some courage to come, and we want them to come voluntarily. By summoning the witnesses, it takes it a step too far. As I mentioned, and as my other colleagues have mentioned, we want them to come voluntarily. We want to invite them, and if there is a compromise about the wording, that would be welcomed. And right now, we're hearing that committees are finding it very difficult to get witnesses to come. Sometimes it's, just one, or sometimes it's none. So this doesn't bode well for the future. We want to encourage people to come and share their expertise and their experience. There's been so much change in how this committee has evolved this session. We've asked ministers to come, which has never been done before or rarely. We are entertaining motions that have gone too far from our public accounts mandate, and I'm disappointed that the politicization of this committee, which has had a long-standing tradition of producing unanimous reports with all parties, and I'm sure Mr. Macaulay will recall those times. We did. Oh, Oh, my apologies. It was OGO that we were on together. Yes, yeah, and that was always fun there. But in any case, all parties before, we worked together to look at the draft reports and come to an agreement. And at this time, normally, we would still be looking at new studies, new reports. And I don't think that we've even touched on those spring reports that were tabled not too long ago in March and April. So I just also want to note that we've never in this committee, in the history of this committee, had so many motions brought forth all at once. So we should try to find some other means, come to a compromise. We should be more progressive in our steps rather than jumping right to a summons. Perhaps we could see how other committees go about inviting witnesses, as well as perhaps change the wording instead of summoning, inviting. Something to consider.
You'll be up soon, Madame St-Ledingay.
Well, let's try again in a different way to invite them, but not to go towards summons. Thank you.
Ms. Bradford, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My concern is that the Public Accounts Committee has completely come off the rails, and we are straying farther and farther away from the mandate of this committee, which is to review the reports of the Auditor General. And there are certainly more than ample reports for this committee to review and comment on. And in fact, we have a number of reports that we need to be reviewing and hopefully tabling in the House before it rises later this month. So when we talk about calling witnesses before us, I feel that it's very, very important that we treat all these witnesses with respect. And on another committee that I serve on, earlier today, we had 2 panels of witnesses lined up. One of the witnesses flew all the way in from Saskatchewan. The Conservatives hijacked that committee by introducing a motion and filibustering. And not one question was asked of any of the witnesses, which I think is extremely disrespectful.
Was that this committee or another committee?
It was another committee. Yeah, okay, but I'm just showing how badly these things can go.
Sure.
So anyway, and more recently, when we were dealing with our COVID vaccine study, we sent out some requests, I believe, to all the manufacturers of various vaccines to appear before the committee, and not all of them came before us. So it's not unprecedented that sometimes witnesses, for whatever reason, and sometimes apparently they don't disclose, they may choose not to appear. And I'm
going to correct that. Committees will make that decision. Witnesses do not. And this committee made the decision in that case that we were not going to press it. That was our decision, not the witnesses. Let's be very clear on that. Witnesses don't excuse themselves because they don't feel like coming. Thank you.
Let me clarify. I don't believe our committee has ever summoned witnesses before this committee. And I don't feel that we probably want to go that route. Like I said, I've unfortunately, a couple of hours ago, experienced witnesses being badly disrespected by a committee through process. So, first of all, Mr. Macaulay's original motion was that we would demand, actually, 10 years of unredacted tax returns of charitable information on a charitable organization, the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation. And that particular motion would put the CRA employees at great risk.
Relevance, Chair.
And
it's not the motion we're discussing.
Okay, so that was, but I'm just saying how this has now blown. So first of all, that would put those employees at great jeopardy for persecution, including fines up to imprisonment. And now your, Mr. Macaulay, Mr. Genuis's motion is now saying that we want to take...
Point of order, Chair? Point of order? I don't mean to interrupt my colleague, but I did see that her colleague had a bit of an accident with the coffee. I don't know if he's burnt. I just want to make sure he's
sorry.
all right.
All right, thank you. We appreciate
Enough of
thank
the
you.
delay
Mr.
tactics.
Ms. Bradford, you have the floor. Some like it hot. Mrs. Bradford, you have the
Okay.
floor.
Well, I hope everyone's okay over there. Okay. A bit of a heated discussion, so we don't want anyone getting burned in the process.
Literally.
Yes. So anyway, concern for my fellow colleagues here. So now I just feel that, we're getting, first of all, we were asking for unredacted records of tax returns of a charitable foundation, and now we're asking this latest motion that Mr. Genuis has put forward is to authorize the chair to summon witnesses. Again, we've never done that. We invite witnesses, we encourage witnesses, we hopefully compel them to comply. But I just feel that summoning witnesses goes beyond what we have historically done. And I just don't see how summoning someone would add to what we're supposed to be doing. And I say reviewing Auditor General's reports. We just seem to be getting further and further away all the time, every meeting. We're straying from our mandate and what we're supposed to accomplish. And meanwhile, some of the things that we've worked weeks on may not even make it to the House and get tabled because we're going down other rabbit holes or branches. So that's my feeling. I just think that this is inappropriate, both in context and approach.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Madame Sécla-Desgagnés first, and then. But I just want to say, very valid to discuss the rationale and the mechanisms we have for before us. The question of the study itself was passed unanimously. I'm going to corral back to that. I will say though, I'm going to say just a quick point for some of our members as well. Of note, I think Mr. Fragaskatis and I have a unique experience. We were both on a committee that summoned a witness, and Ms. Bradford, you are right. It is an exceptionally rare occurrence. I've had one member ask me. The difference between an invitation when we invite witnesses, it is the committee's request they appear, and of course generally people comply with that, and that is something we do as a matter of courtesy, but it's one where we're appealing people to appear before Parliament in the standing committee. Elevating it to a summons is it is a demand, and it is a demand that. Is rarely rejected because it's akin to a court appearance. It virtually obliges the individual to appear. Now, of course, people can still not appear before that committee, at which point the committee can discuss it, and if it chooses to, elevate it to the House of Commons. So that's what we're debating here. I know one member was looking for kind of a point of law. I think that's. Am I right, Clerk? Would you say is that a fairly accurate difference between an invitation is we hope you'll come and a summons is we expect you to come? Oh, 1 second. Yes, I'm accurate. So on that note. Madame Sécla-Desgagnés, vous avez la parole, s'il vous plaît.
Ms. Sinclair-Desgagnés. Thank you, Chair. I'll use an important theory. I take the theory that all colleagues here present, including the colleagues opposite, want to delve into the substance of the matter because they voted in favor of a study of the Trudeau Foundation to find out what happened there. With this very important theory, let's consider the fact that after this week, we are left with 3 weeks at best before the summer. Knowing that our time is limited, we need to act to be able to do what we were mandated to do, carry out the study on the Trudeau Foundation. Therefore, and I'm talking to you in good faith, do we agree to amend this motion? And I'm not proposing an amendment right now. I'm looking at my colleagues in a friendly way so that we can reinvite the witnesses. And when we are reinviting them, we demonstrate the importance of their appearance. So we reinvite them firmly. And I must say that I have total trust in our chairperson. He knows what a valid excuse is. It could be illness, a very important matter. We do have flexibility in the calendar. But if after 1 week, either we have a refusal or no response, considering that we have very limited time left for the 2 meetings we are supposed to have, after that, we authorize the chair to use the order to appear. I don't have the specific term in French. Okay, the summons then, to appear. I believe that this method is between the two. It's a compromise so that we're able to move on to something. If your desire is really that we move on to something, and that is my desire, and I believe that that's what most of the colleagues here present want, that's what I'm proposing. And I think that that's a middle ground. We invite them firmly because it is important for witnesses who have been identified, and some have been invited by 3 parties, and that's the majority of Parliament, that they be present in the committee and answer our questions. And one of the reasons is that there were serious contradictions in the testimonies heard so far. So it's up to us. It's going to be up to the Committee on Public Accounts to obtain responses on what really happens and to know the truth. It's important for us to hear witnesses. So I understand that you want to drop the tone and we don't summon them immediately. So let's give them additional time to accept the invitation being given with good faith. But if after 1 week, unfortunately, there's no response, we authorize the chair to summon the key witnesses. So in a friendly way, I think that we can find a compromise, and I'm asking for the good faith of all my colleagues.
Happen to have the floor next. If you'd like to either respond to that or
Sure,
talk about
Mr.
anything
Chair.
like-
So our colleague says that she is open to presenting a compromise in a friendly way, her words. And I would say this to anyone, not just her. I just need to see, our side needs to see wording. So I wonder if we can take a short pause for wording to be put together, and then we can come back. So let's.
I'm going to seek. I think that's a fine idea. I just want to make sure there is wording that can be discussed before taking that recess. I need to. I'm kind of looking for a consensus here.
Do we have wording on the table?
Well, no, I don't. There's nothing on the floor. Can members have there been any discussions?
Maybe let's take a short recess. Like
Okay.
I don't want to see this be a because we got other business
All right.
to deal with. But like 5 minutes.
I'm going to say 3 minutes. Someone will yell 5, so we'll have a 5-minute recess. before we suspended. Mr. Fragaskatos, you have the floor, and there is a speakers list here. So
No, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I think there's colleagues on my side also that wish to get onto that speakers list because they have a perspective that they wish to share. There was in the discussions that have taken place, perhaps some progress. I don't think we're quite there, but I think there has been some progress in a positive direction. I'm tempted to ask for another 5 minutes, but I doubt you'll give it, or maybe you will give it.
I think we need to hear a little more. Yeah, no, I think we need to kind of have a public discussion, and if I'm not sensing we're close enough for that. So there is a list, though, Mr. Fragaskatos. I can put you back on it again if you're yielding, and the next person is one of your colleagues as well.
Various sides, Mr. Chair, will, I think, be able perhaps to put some pen to paper and identify a potential compromise here, an amendment. You can even call it a friendly amendment if you want, because the substance of the motion, I hope, remains intact. I hope. Let me just make clear that I think this motion is not in line with what this committee should be looking at or the mandate, but if this is the direction we're going to go, again, it's a minority parliament, and opposition members will try to take the steering wheel, but I think it's incumbent on us to restore a sense of responsibility in terms of what the committee should be looking at. I'll leave it at that as far as my comments on the committee's direction. Now, as I speak, I think perhaps members could be, again, taking pen to paper and putting something together that could work as far as a compromise is concerned. In the meantime, let me just return to some of the points that I had put on the table but didn't finish with. First of all, there is the point of the summons in terms not only of its place in this particular debate, but also in terms of its place within the wider Westminster parliamentary tradition, Mr. Chair. And you being a student of history, because we have worked on committees before, and I know that you're interested very much in history, you will know that the move towards issuing a summons within the Westminster tradition is itself extraordinary. So this is not something that's, when members on this side communicate a strong concern, to put it mildly, about the possibility of a summons being issued towards witnesses, this is not something that's unique to this particular question. It's not something that's unique to Canadian democracy at the federal level in the moment that we find ourselves. This is something that, within the broader tradition of Westminster that we borrow from, is something that is considered problematic from start to finish. I think that is something that we have to pay attention to. We can't ignore that, and for that reason as well, it is extremely important that we live up to our responsibilities as parliamentarians in this regard. I wonder what the aim is in terms of a summons. That can't be achieved by reissuing a letter and communicating, yes, a firmness in tone. Perhaps, Mr. Chair, you can be more firm in your letter. You're a polite man. You're a good guy, I think, and
easy.
I say I think in the best sense. It's because we don't know each other extremely well. But everything I've seen from you, Mr. Chair, despite we might disagree from time to time on certain points, the point remains is that yes, I do respect the fact that as committee chair, you have the ability to issue a letter and make it as stern as you want. And in line with that, again, I go back to the possibility of you simply reissuing a letter that's more stern and see where that goes. That's not something we've considered at this point. Instead, we want to go from requests being made, requests being turned down, and then well, we're going to go to a summons. It's not something that's been done before, in my experience. And you mentioned it yourself. So it is relevant to say again that on the committee you and I worked on, when a summons was eventually put forward, that came after a long time. It was not immediate. Here we're rushing immediately to that outcome, which I have a huge problem with. What does it say about this committee if we, through you, Chair, tell witnesses to come, they decline, and we say, well, now we're issuing a summons? In other words, the most extreme kind of response that a committee can give. It's not good for this committee. It's not good for the reputation of this committee. It's not good for the reputation of members of Parliament, and specifically us. I think that's something that can't be dismissed either, Mr. Chair. Again, we have shown ourselves to be able to work together towards reaching a compromise. I wonder what members, if they are still interested in pursuing that, wish to put forward. I'm open to it. Liberal members are open to that. But of course, it depends on the wording and the precedent that it would establish, because I don't want it to negatively affect any subsequent meetings that we would have at this particular committee or that other parliamentary committees would have, pointing back to that time in the summer of 2023 when the Public Accounts Committee decided thus and so. I know that there's other members on the list that wish to share something, and I'll leave my comments there for now and yield to them.
Very good. Mr. Sidhu, you have the floor, please. I have got Mr. Sidhu, Ms. Shanahan, Mr. McCauley, Mr. Desjardins, and Mr. Genuis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, I don't want to get into this coffee spill, but want to make sure that the carpet's okay. Coffee does stain. I want to make sure that the call was made to the janitor. I know there's an accident over there, but I have great respect for public property and the sacred institution. But to get into what we're discussing over here, getting into the discussion
Order.
here on the floor, speaking to what my colleague had mentioned, we are going, really fast from inviting to summoning somebody, and what I've seen in some of the other committees that I've been on is, sometimes invitations don't work for the person, and we should be a bit flexible and humane. There could be some circumstances that we're not made aware of that we need to look into. It could be for health reasons, it could be for travel, but I think it's important that we do give the witnesses another chance to get back to us before we demand or summon through you, Mr. Chair. I think it's very important to make sure that we do remain flexible. We want to be respectful and give that chance. And of course, what we're discussing now, it's the motion at hand. I don't believe it falls within the mandate of our committee. We're here to review Auditor General reports and report back to the House. I know there's many reports pending. The list is growing very long. We're having colleagues in the House ask us when will we be getting to certain reports that they're interested in. I believe there's one on Indigenous drinking water. Is that the one? Yeah, before I got on this committee. There's that one that I know is very important to some of our colleagues here as well, and important to myself. With constituents have reached out on that one as well. But I know that within our mandate, there are actually, my wife, I see a colleague on the other side, that my wife's a teacher, and her students discuss Indigenous drinking water availability, and so it is important to my constituents, and students have written to my office about this, and that's something I know it's very important to so many of us. So going back to the motion at hand, I don't think this falls within our mandate, and we need to stay on track here to make sure that the committee that we're on, we focus on the mandate that we're given, We focus on the reports that we're tasked to review. And so I think very important to have that on the record for those that are watching, that we need to stay on our mandate. We need to focus on what we're put on this committee to do. And I know a lot of my colleagues here will have more to add to this, but I do believe that we need to give witnesses another chance before we demand or summon. Sometimes, like I said, the circumstances may not have worked the first time. There's other committees where we ask witnesses to come and they're not available. There's sometimes we select 20 witnesses and 10 are not available, and we figure out a way. But I think we need to remain flexible in terms of asking our witnesses to come, and I think that's what we should be going forward with, is having that invitation sent out again to see what's the flexibility and what we can do. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Shanahan.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Indeed, I think that during the break, we very quickly arrived at, well, let me comment my colleague, Ms. Sinclair de Gagné. For her thought process during this topic. I know that she wants to find a compromise, something that's humanitarian, that would allow us to respect witnesses, in the sense that, yes, it's a big step to go directly. I think it's the clerk who gave us the technical term, the summons. I would like to hear the clerk say something about that, because in other circumstances, I have heard that when an individual receives such a summons, I believe it's sent out through a letter. It's like a subpoena from a lawyer. There are consequences, legal consequences associated with the decision that the person makes, associated with what follows the summons. It's only reasonable that people will look for their own legal advice in such circumstances. But before getting to that point, as I'm saying, that's an extreme measure, in my opinion. Because there's an insinuation that the witnesses have something to hide. We don't know. We do know that some witnesses have already appeared before other committees. So it's not about lack of cooperation in the past. There may be very legitimate reasons why they are hesitating. From what I've seen in the past, it's a letter prepared by the chair who is representing us. The chair is representing committee members. It's not the chair deciding to take such a decision. I don't believe so. If it were a leader of our political party, for members of the opposition, it will be seen as bad faith from the practice of chairs that I've seen, irrespective of their political affiliation, government or opposition. They always check with committee members before they move forward or take such a decision, which is a very important one. It's in that sense that I believe that we have discussed ways of looking at the motion, reviewing the motion to add an intermediary step a step that will signal to any potential witnesses that there's a series of actions that follow. It's like in any disciplinary action. The people concerned know that it's better when people know that this is step one. If I do not comply to what is being requested, there's going to be a consequence, and people have a choice to make at that point to act voluntarily and comply with the request. When I look at the motion, in its original format, it's not clear. It's not clear what witnesses we're talking about, what we're talking about. Now we are in public session, so we can't mention names. But it's kind of broad. Are we going to start summoning all sorts of witnesses? We don't know. Once again, Mr. Chair, I do not believe that you like to bear that responsibility. I know that in other committees, the chair, when there's no consensus, which is usually the best route, the chair always wants to make sure that actions taken are as required or according to the will of the committee. And the chair makes sure that he's supported by committee members. We know that there are 3 witnesses. The chair talked about 3 witnesses who were invited for reasons already mentioned. Either they were traveling or they had nothing to add. I didn't note the 3rd reason. You may remind me what that reason was. On the face of it, I have the impression that the witnesses do not realize the importance of this invitation. That's why I believe that an intermediary step is a good idea, and I hope that we will be able to work together to find a way of helping our chair to prepare a letter or move on to the next steps and be supported in a way that he can be supported by everyone here around the table. It's important for me for it to be clear the number of witnesses we're talking about, and that it's really the committee that continues to work with the chair at every stage. But I understand that there are concerns about the timelines. It's also possible to see the time we consider normal. For such a letter whose objective is to invite with the caveat that it is possible for there to be a summons. But I don't think we should play that card right away. And I see that you do agree with what I'm saying, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that as well. But I would like to have that clarification from the clerk. What are the consequences for a Canadian individual who refuses to comply with such a summons?
So I just double checked, but my memory served me correct. It would, of course, come back to this committee for consideration, at which point the committee could take any number of steps, including referring it to the House, or decide to do nothing. Those are the two polls. Mr. McCauley, you have the floor.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and appreciate your time. I won't be long. I'm just disappointed that this is an emotion that we all agreed to unanimously. You know, it's funny I'm hearing right now that people are saying it's not within our mandate. The same people who actually voted for this motion are now saying that the motion they supported is apparently out of order. I think we should just, we hear repeatedly that we have other things to do. I think that maybe we should just vote and get to this. I don't think this is great use of our time to continue to filibuster out witnesses that we committee agreed to have appear. I don't think it's an issue of one or two. It appears to be concerted effort by all the witnesses to refuse or ignore our committee. I would just ask the government to perhaps stop delaying and allow this to get to a vote. If they're so willing to work on consensus or as a group, then I think we should put it to a vote and see what the members of this committee think. And I'm very happy to leave it in the chair's hand. The amendment has been, or the amendment to the amendment, or the amendment suggesting that we give them one last chance, and that if no one agrees, or if they do not agree, that we give it to the chair's discretion to proceed from there. That's all, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm disappointed you didn't show the same concern for my jacket as you did for the carpet.
Thank you very much. Mr. Desjardins, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks to my colleagues. It's always a fascinating experience at Public Accounts to have to balance, I think, what is the important work of the interest of the public, which is to have some evidence to suggest what Canadians are worried about in the presence of the issues related to the contributions of the Trudeau Foundation. As that work continues in other committees, I think this committee does have a role to play in relation to finding out how the CRA, we did that last week, and other entities that are within the government's oversight mechanisms are actually going to be doing this work. But I do think that given the gravity of the situation with some of the witnesses that we have requested to appear and the absence of those members, it does further motivate, I think, mistrust. And so I do believe that this is of the public interest. So one, and I do agree with many of my colleagues who've spoken in previous, members from the Conservatives. I agree with the need to see these folks appear. I also agree with our Liberal colleagues that going straight to a summons is obviously something that this committee is not entertaining. And that to me is why we're having this filibuster right now. And as a way to attempt to end this filibuster and to get to the work that this committee's entrusted to do on behalf of Canadians, I think that I'd like to table an amendment to this. I can send it over to the clerk maybe. I don't have the clerk's email, but maybe the other account that they have.
Yeah, do you have wording, Mr. Desjardins, you want to read, and then you can send it over, and I'll just highlight.
Sure.
It will come to you as well. But or do you want to send first
Let me
or
know
read
when you're.
first?
Let me know when you're ready. Are you ready?
I think yes. Well, I might have you read it again, but you go ahead.
So that in relation to this study of the Trudeau Foundation, the committee requests the following, and then I understand there's 3 representatives, Edward Johnson, David Johnson, and Mel Cap, to be invited to this committee. Additionally, given the gravity of the issue, the committee reserved the right to consider a summons, period.
So I have an amendment to.
I'm open to amendments.
Yeah, I've got an amendment now to the motion. Mr. Rex, I have you down. You get one spot, 4 hands, but it's not your turn yet. So there's a speaking list. So I will come to you. Well, I'm going to maintain the speaking list. Just hold on a second, Mr. Desjardins. Could you email that to the committee email, please?
Which is different than
no, the public accounts, like
one.
PACP.
Oh, okay.
It's probably the one that always pops up.
Got it.
Are you done, Mr. Desjardins? Is that your okay? Because the good day, Mr. Ruff. Good to see you. I had Mr. Genuis down. He has stepped out. So, Mr. Fragashouse, do you want to speak to this briefly, and then if you'd like to propose a quick
Chair,
break, we can do that.
and thank you to Mr. Desjardins for the amendment. However, I would like to look at it closer. So would my side. If we can take 5 minutes, that would be appreciated.
Is that? Yeah, I'll keep
No,
the clerk.
no
the chair,
offense,
that was,
we'll-
no, no, that,
we'll-
that
we'll
no,
try
no,
and keep
that,
to 5.
You
How's
should
that?
you should direct that at me. That was I
we'll
felt
try to
last
keep it at
time there
5.
was discussions. It will be 5 minutes. Thank you. Suspension. take their seats again, please. Mr. Fragascatos, you still have the floor if you would like it. And then I will look for others, or heaven forbid, call a vote. There's an amendment to the motion. Pardon me? They're still working on the translation. I could have it read again if you would like, but it is on its way.
Is it too much to ask, since colleagues have not had a chance to look at it in terms of the written form of the what's been suggested? Can we just wait a few more minutes until it has been emailed?
Sure. Yes.
Okay. So we'll
Well, yes. I'm just going to sit here, or I'll check the. Do you have it right there? I'm going to have Mr. Desjardins read it again, and then I will suspend in the meantime. Would you mind reading it again, Mr. Desjardins?
Sure. Did it not go to the?
Oh no,
right
they
email?
have it. We're working on the translation now. That just takes a few minutes.
Oh, I understand.
So I'm going to have you read it so I can internalize it again, because I actually don't track my emails as closely as I should. So and first of all, Mr. Desjardins, would you move your microphone up just a tad? Try speaking
does
now.
that sound good to the interpreters? Is that okay?
Yes, it is. Yes. So would you, if you read that motion while the clerk's working on the translation, then I'm going to suspend right after you read it.
Sure. That in relation to this study of the Trudeau Foundation, the committee requests the following: Edward Johnson, David Johnston, Mel Cap be invited to this committee. Additionally, given the gravity of the issue, the committee reserve the right to consider a summons.
Okay. I'm going to suspend until I bring us back. Check your emails. There should be the motion dans les deux langues officielles. Is it below? Is it in the text? Is it an attachment or was it in the text?
In the text.
You're just, I mean, your soul or your brain?
Hey, John, I got an email, but didn't have an attachment, I don't think.
Okay, we're checking this right now. Just stay tuned. Coming again. Oh. So it should have arrived at 5:49. There should be a So that I'm going to repeat it here. That in relation to the study of the Trudeau Foundation, the committee requests the following: Edward Johnson, David Johnson, Mel Cat be invited to this committee. Additionally, given the gravity of the issue, the committee reserve the right to consider a summons. Que, relativement à l'étude.
That in relation to the study on the Trudeau Foundation, the committee requests the following: Edward Johnston, David Johnston, Melka be invited to this committee. Additionally, considering the gravity of the issue, the committee reserves the right to consider a summons.
Oui, Madame Shanahan.
Yes, Ms. Shanahan.
We're on the same page. That would require also deleting the end of the.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That implies
It's an
deleting
amendment to
the-
delete and
yeah.
replace with this. Yes, Ms. Fragascatos. Yes, okay, go ahead, Ms. Fragascatos.
So I want to thank Mr. Desjardins for putting forward an idea, a suggestion that I think moves us forward in a positive way with respect to this debate. I think that it's important for us to consider what has been said and the ramifications of this entire motion. Leave aside the amendment, but this entire motion. I think that, again, it has created a situation where a precedent is being set, Mr. Chair, and we can't decide these things without keeping in mind what that precedent means. I know Ms. Shanahan wants to make some comments as well, and so I'll yield my time to her to add some thoughts on
No,
this.
I have a speaking list, so I'm happy to recognize you afterwards, but I'm going to go to, it's Mr. McCauley. Would you like the floor after Mr. McCauley? So,
Well, it was concerning the deletion, so.
I'll continue then.
okay.
The issue with I'm not going to speak to the amendment here. Let me just speak to the motion overall. I think it is, and again, Mr. Desjardins has done his best to reach to reach a compromise. The challenge, of course, is that we continue to focus on a summons. And that, for me, is a situation where this committee creates a scenario that establishes the kind of precedent that sets us back in a very unfortunate way. And Chair, let me simply remind you, and you know this, but it's important to, I suppose, put on the record once again what this committee's mandate is all about. I make clear, and I read directly from our mandate letter, not mandate letter, but our overall mandate. The mandate of the Public Accounts Committee is to review and report on the public accounts of Canada and all reports of the Auditor General of Canada. That is where in the motion that Mr. Janis has put forward are we debating the mandate, anything that relates to the overall mandate of the committee? I don't see it. I only see a motion that's come out of left field that does not push us in any direction that would allow for the mandate of this committee to come to life. It's problematic. It's problematic from start to finish. Again, there's nothing in here about a certain foundation or any particular charity. The Auditor General has no role in any of this. I think the Auditor General has emphasized that she doesn't have a role when it comes to the governance of particular organizations, like the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation. But here we are discussing and debating a matter that we don't need to be debating. Unfortunately, this is what exactly we're doing. So I have a challenge with that. And I think members on this side have a challenge as well with what's happened here. And so I think Ms. Shanahan is on the speaking list or is not on the speaking list?
She is.
She is, okay.
After the next speaker, so.
I'll hear from Mr. McCauley. I'd love to hear what Ms. Shanahan has to say too.
Very good. So I in the last meeting, on another motion, I did remind that we're to speak to the motion. I appreciate the view that members are not satisfied with this study, but I will go back and highlight, you all voted that this was passed unanimously. So I'm going to sharpen the debate on the amendment at hand to the motion. So we're all in this together because we all voted for this together. And on that, I will pass it to Mr. McCauley. You have the floor.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And I'm a bit lost, which is not a uncommon thing in this committee or other committees. I'm looking at Mr. Desilets' motion. I appreciate, as always, his middle-of-the-road interventions to try and move the committee forward. There's nothing in this motion that satisfies us in forcing a summons. So I'm kind of left with the impression that the government side is just filibustering for the sake of filibustering to kill off the committee, because Mr. Desilets' motion just says to reinvite, and the committee reserves the right to summons, which would mean we would actually have to vote on it, which would mean we'd have to debate it, which means the Liberals could block it. So I know Ms. Shanahan's next on the list. Maybe she could fill us in on their intentions, because again, Mr. Desilets' motion, if they are supported, would achieve their goals, which is not to force the summons. So again, maybe the government side could enlighten me what their intention is for the continual filibuster on a motion that seems what they've been proposing from the beginning. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. McCauley. Ms. Shanahan, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Chair. And I would like to say that I appreciate the amendment that has been put forward. That being said, I move that this meeting now be adjourned.
That is a non-debatable motion. If the clerk could call a roll call on that, please. This is to adjourn the meeting.
Mr. Ruff,
No.
Mr. Cram,
No.
Mr. McCauley, Madame Sinclair Desgagnés.
Petite précision, est-ce qu'on est...
Clarification. Are we adjourning the debate on this specific motion, not the entire committee meeting?
I'm sorry. Was it on the debate or the meeting?
Oh, I stand corrected. J'ai mal compris.
I did not quite understand. No, it's to end the meeting.
Madame Sinclair Desgagnés.
Miss Sinclair Desgagnés? No.
Mr. Desjardins.
Yes.
Miss Bradford.
Yes.
Mr. Fredgiscatos.
Yes.
Miss Shanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sidou.
Oui.
Miss Yip.
Yes.
Yes pour 6, nays 4 contre.
Just 1 second, call. The meeting is adjourned.
Thanks, Mr. Leiper.
No, I didn't do well.